In the world of military precision, where 1 second can mean the difference between life and death, where breath control matters more than courage, and where the steady hand of a marksman can change the course of history, there lived a woman whose name was whispered with both fear and respect across military bases worldwide. She wasn't born to be a killer, yet she became the most feared sniper in modern warfare. Her story isn't just about perfect shots and confirmed kills. It's about a quiet girl from a small farming town who discovered that sometimes the most unlikely people carry within them the power to protect those who cannot protect themselves. When the room went silent that day, when even the most hardened soldiers stopped their conversations mid-sentence, it wasn't because of rank or protocol. It was because they all knew they were in the presence of someone who had redefined what it meant to be a guardian angel, one bullet at a time. Sarah Martinez had never imagined that her steady hands, which had helped her father repair farm equipment since she was 8 years old, would one day hold the power to save lives from over a mile away. Growing up on a cattle ranch in Montana, she learned early that precision mattered. When fixing a broken water pump meant the difference between healthy cattle and loss of income, there was no room for mistakes. Her father, Miguel, a former Marine who had served 2 tours in Vietnam, taught her that attention to detail wasn't just important, it was survival. The Martinez family ranch stretched across 300 acres of rugged terrain, where the nearest neighbor lived 15 miles away, and the closest town was a 40-minute drive through winding mountain roads. Sarah's childhood was spent learning skills that most city kids never encountered. She could track wounded cattle across rocky ground, repair diesel engines with nothing but basic tools, and shoot accurately enough to protect the livestock from predators that roamed the wilderness surrounding their property. Miguel had introduced Sarah to firearms when she turned 12, not as weapons of war, but as tools of necessity. Living in an area where wolves, mountain lions, and occasional bears posed real threats to their livelihood, knowing how to shoot wasn't optional. It was practical survival. Her first rifle was an old bolt-action .308 that had belonged to her grandfather, a weathered weapon that required patience and skill rather than rapid-fire capability. What surprised Miguel most wasn't that Sarah took to shooting naturally, many ranch kids did, but how she approached it with an almost scientific curiosity. While her younger brother Carlos treated target practice like a game, Sarah studied every aspect of marksmanship with intense focus. She wanted to understand why wind speed affected bullet trajectory, how temperature changes influenced accuracy, and why breathing techniques could make the difference between hitting and missing a target. During her high school years, Sarah's shooting abilities became legendary in their small community. She won every local competition, often competing against adult hunters who had decades more experience. Her mathematics teacher, Mrs. Peterson, noticed that Sarah intuitively understood ballistics calculations that typically required advanced physics courses. When Sarah helped other students with trigonometry problems, she often explained complex concepts by relating them to bullet trajectories and target calculations. The day that changed everything started like any other morning in her senior year. Sarah was in the barn helping her father repair a broken hay baler when they heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching their property. Living in such a remote area, helicopters usually meant either medical emergencies or law enforcement activity. Miguel stepped outside to investigate, and Sarah followed, wiping grease from her hands on an old shop rag. The helicopter bore military markings, and, as it landed in their largest pasture, Sarah could see several uniformed personnel on board. A woman in army dress uniform stepped out first, followed by 2 men in combat fatigues. Sarah's first thought was that something had happened to her cousin David, who was currently deployed overseas with the 82nd Airborne Division. Staff Sergeant Lisa Chun approached the farmhouse with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command, but her expression was serious rather than grave. Miguel stepped forward to meet her, his military bearing automatically returning despite having been out of service for over 20 years. Sarah hung back near the barn, uncertain whether she should join the conversation or continue working. The conversation that followed would reshape Sarah's understanding of her own capabilities and future possibilities. Sergeant Chun explained that the Army was implementing a new recruitment program specifically designed to identify individuals with exceptional marksmanship potential. Sarah's performance in civilian shooting competitions had caught the attention of military scouts who regularly monitored such events looking for promising candidates. What made this visit unusual was that Sergeant Chen wasn't just offering Sarah the opportunity to enlist as a regular infantryman. She was being invited to participate in an elite sniper training program that typically required several years of military service before consideration. The Army had identified fewer than 50 candidates nationwide who demonstrated the rare combination of shooting ability, mathematical aptitude, and psychological stability necessary for advanced marksmanship roles. Miguel listened carefully as Sergeant Chun outlined the program details, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated his understanding of military training requirements. Sarah remained quiet, absorbing information about a world she had never seriously considered entering. The idea of using her shooting skills in service to her country was appealing, but the reality of military life seemed overwhelming compared to the peaceful routine of ranch work. Sergeant Chen spent nearly 2 hours explaining not just the opportunities available to Sarah, but also the serious responsibilities that came with military service. She was honest about the dangers involved in combat roles and the emotional challenges that snipers faced when their skills were used in life-or-death situations. This wasn't a romanticized recruitment pitch. It was a realistic assessment of what military life would require from someone with Sarah's unique abilities. The decision didn't have to be made immediately, but Sergeant Chen emphasized that opportunities like this were extremely rare. The Army was willing to guarantee Sarah placement in advanced marksmanship training, something that typically required years of exemplary service to achieve. In return, she would commit to an 8-year enlistment that would include extensive training, likely deployment overseas, and assignment to elite units where her skills would be utilized in high-stakes missions. That evening, as the helicopter disappeared over the mountain ridge, Sarah sat on the front porch with her parents discussing the opportunity that had literally dropped from the sky. Miguel was proud that his daughter's abilities had gained such recognition, but he was also concerned about the realities of military combat. He had seen enough war to understand that even the most skilled soldiers faced dangers that training couldn't always prepare them for. Sarah's mother, Elena, had remained quiet during the sergeant's visit, but now she voiced concerns that went beyond physical safety. She worried about how military service would change her daughter's gentle nature, whether the girl who spent weekends helping injured animals at the local veterinary clinic could handle the psychological demands of taking human lives when necessary. These weren't questions that could be answered easily or quickly. The family spent the next several weeks researching everything they could find about military sniper programs, talking to veterans in their community, and carefully considering what this decision would mean for Sarah's future. Miguel contacted some of his old Marine Corps buddies who had remained in military service, seeking honest opinions about the opportunities and challenges Sarah would face as a female in traditionally male-dominated roles. What they learned was that the modern military had evolved significantly since Miguel's service in Vietnam. Women were increasingly integrated into combat roles, and exceptional performance was recognized regardless of gender. However, they also learned that sniper training was among the most demanding programs the military offered, with failure rates exceeding 60% even among highly qualified candidates. Sarah found herself drawn to the challenge rather than deterred by it. The more she learned about the precision and discipline required for advanced marksmanship, the more interested she became in testing her abilities against military standards. She had always thrived on difficult tasks that required patience, skill, and mental toughness. The idea of protecting fellow soldiers through her marksmanship abilities appealed to her sense of service and responsibility. 3 weeks after Sergeant Chen's visit, Sarah made her decision. She would enlist in the Army with the goal of becoming a military sniper. The choice wasn't made lightly or impulsively. It was the result of careful consideration, family discussion, and honest self-assessment of her abilities and motivations. She understood that this path would be challenging in ways she couldn't fully anticipate, but she also recognized that her unique skills could serve a purpose larger than herself. The morning Sarah signed her enlistment papers at the recruiting station in Billings, Montana, marked the end of one chapter of her life and the beginning of another that would eventually lead her to become one of the most effective snipers in modern military history. But that morning, She was simply an 18-year-old girl from a cattle ranch, taking the first step toward discovering the full extent of her remarkable abilities. Fort Benning, Georgia, in the middle of July felt like stepping into a furnace. Sarah had never experienced heat and humidity like this, where sweat began forming the moment she stepped outside, and the air felt thick enough to drink. The first day of basic training hit her like a physical blow, not because of the shouting drill sergeants or demanding physical requirements, but because of the overwhelming realization that everything familiar about her life had been left behind in Montana. The other recruits in her training company came from backgrounds as diverse as America itself. Inner-city kids who had never seen open countryside, suburban teenagers who had never held a firearm, and college graduates who had never experienced physical hardship. Sarah's ranch upbringing gave her advantages that became apparent during the first week of training. While others struggled with equipment maintenance, sleep deprivation, and the basic physical demands of soldier life, she adapted with surprising ease. Drill Sergeant Martinez, no relation, despite sharing the same last name, noticed Sarah's competence early in the training cycle. She moved through weapons cleaning with the methodical precision of someone who had maintained firearms for years, completed obstacle courses with the steady determination of someone accustomed to physical challenges, and handled the stress of constant evaluation without the emotional volatility that affected many new recruits. What set Sarah apart wasn't just her individual performance, but her instinctive understanding of how to help struggling team members without creating the appearance of showing off. When Private Jackson from Detroit couldn't master the proper technique for cleaning his rifle, Sarah quietly demonstrated the correct procedure during evening maintenance periods. When Private Williams from Phoenix collapsed during a particularly brutal road march, Sarah helped carry his pack for the final 2 miles without being asked or seeking recognition. The demanding schedule of basic training, awakening before dawn, constant physical training, weapons instruction, tactical exercises, and evening equipment maintenance, created an environment where individual weaknesses quickly became apparent. Sarah watched fellow recruits break down under pressure, quit in frustration, or get recycled to later training classes for failing to meet standards. Each departure reminded her that military service wasn't guaranteed. It had to be earned every day through consistent performance. The first real test of Sarah's shooting abilities came during the 3rd week of basic training when recruits were introduced to their primary weapon, the M4 carbine. While Sarah had extensive experience with hunting rifles, military weapons operated differently and required different shooting techniques. The M4 was lighter than her ranch rifle, but had a faster rate of fire and different ballistics characteristics that required adjustment to her shooting style. The qualifying course required hitting targets at various distances using different shooting positions, standing, kneeling, and prone, while wearing full combat equipment and under time pressure. Sarah approached the qualification like any other challenge, methodically learning the weapon's characteristics, practicing until her muscle memory adapted to the new system, and maintaining the mental discipline that had served her well in civilian competition. When qualification day arrived, Sarah's performance exceeded not just the minimum standards, but the scores typically achieved by soldiers with years of experience. She hit 49 out of 50 targets, missing only 1 shot at the longest distance due to an equipment malfunction that caused her rifle scope to shift slightly. Even that miss was close enough to the target center that observers questioned whether it should have been scored as a hit. Drill Sergeant Martinez called Sarah aside after the qualification exercise to discuss her shooting performance. He had served as a military instructor for 8 years and had supervised thousands of recruits through basic training. Sarah's marksmanship demonstration was among the most impressive he had witnessed from a new soldier, particularly considering she was firing an unfamiliar weapon under artificial pressure. The conversation that followed opened Sarah's eyes to possibilities she hadn't fully considered. Drill Sergeant Martinez explained that exceptional marksmanship was only one component of becoming an effective military sniper. The training pipeline that led to sniper school required demonstrated excellence in multiple areas: physical fitness, mental stability under extreme stress, advanced mathematical skills for ballistics calculations, patience for extended surveillance missions, and leadership abilities that enabled working effectively in small teams. Sarah learned that qualifying for sniper training typically required 2 to 3 years of exemplary service in infantry units, followed by a rigorous selection process that eliminated most candidates before training even began. However, her pre-enlistment agreement guaranteed her the opportunity to attempt sniper school immediately after basic training and advanced individual training, an unusual arrangement that reflected the Army's recognition of her exceptional potential. The remainder of basic training passed quickly as Sarah focused on mastering every aspect of soldier skills. She excelled in tactical exercises that required stealth and patience, demonstrated leadership during team challenges, and maintained the physical fitness standards despite the demanding training schedule. More importantly, she proved her ability to perform under pressure while maintaining the emotional stability that would be crucial for handling combat stress. Advanced individual training at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, introduced Sarah to the specialized skills she would need as a military intelligence specialist. This assignment seemed unusual for someone destined for sniper training. But Sarah learned that modern military snipers required extensive intelligence gathering and analysis capabilities. They weren't just shooters. They were reconnaissance specialists who gathered battlefield information and eliminated high-value targets with surgical precision. The Arizona training environment presented challenges different from those she had faced in Georgia. The desert terrain, extreme temperature variations, and sparse vegetation required adapting to conditions unlike anything she had experienced in Montana. Sarah discovered that effective marksmanship in desert environments required understanding how heat mirages affected target visibility, how wind patterns changed throughout the day, and how dust and sand could impact weapon performance. Her instructors at Fort Huachuca were impressed by Sarah's analytical approach to solving tactical problems. She didn't just memorize procedures. She understood the reasoning behind different techniques and could adapt methods to fit changing circumstances. When learning to operate surveillance equipment, she quickly grasped how different technologies could be integrated to provide comprehensive battlefield awareness. The intelligence training also introduced Sarah to the psychological aspects of military operations that would become crucial during her sniper career. She learned to analyze enemy behavior patterns, identify high-value targets based on their activities and positions, and understand how removing key personnel could influence broader tactical situations. This training helped her see beyond individual shots to understand how marksmanship fit into larger military objectives. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Reynolds, the commanding officer of Sarah's training battalion, took personal interest in her development after reviewing her academic and practical performance scores. Colonel Reynolds had been one of the first women to serve in combat roles when such opportunities were newly available, and she recognized the challenges Sarah would face as a female pursuing traditionally male-dominated military specialties. The mentoring relationship that developed between Colonel Reynolds and Sarah provided insights that weren't part of the standard curriculum. Colonel Reynolds explained how exceptional performance was necessary, but not sufficient for advancement in competitive military environments. Success required building professional relationships, demonstrating reliability under stress, and maintaining personal standards that exceeded expectations even when others weren't watching. Colonel Reynolds also provided honest perspective on the challenges Sarah would face as a woman in sniper school and subsequent assignments. While official military policy supported equal opportunities, cultural attitudes within some units remained influenced by traditional assumptions about gender roles. Sarah would need to prove herself repeatedly, maintain professional demeanor when facing skepticism or harassment, and never allow others' attitudes to undermine her confidence in her own abilities. The final phase of individual training included joint exercises with other military specialties, giving Sarah her first exposure to the complex coordination required for modern military operations. She worked alongside infantry soldiers, armor crews, aviation units, and engineers, learning how different specialties supported each other during tactical missions. These exercises demonstrated that even the most skilled individual operators were only effective when integrated into larger teams. During one particularly challenging exercise, Sarah's unit was assigned to conduct reconnaissance on enemy positions while providing sniper support for an infantry assault. The mission required her to move undetected across several miles of difficult terrain, establish concealed observation positions, gather intelligence on enemy activities, and be prepared to eliminate specific targets if the tactical situation required precision fire support. The exercise tested every skill Sarah had developed during her training: stealth movement, camouflage techniques, long-range observation, radio communication, and marksmanship under realistic field conditions. She successfully completed all assigned tasks while demonstrating the patience and discipline that would characterize her later career as a sniper. Her performance earned recognition from evaluators who noted her potential for advanced training. As her time at Fort Huachuca neared completion, Sarah received orders to report to the Army Sniper School at Fort Moore, Georgia. The specialized training that followed would determine whether her exceptional shooting abilities could be developed into the comprehensive skill set required for one of the military's most demanding roles. Sarah understood that sniper school would test her in ways that previous training had only hinted at, but she felt prepared for the challenge. The night before departing Arizona, Sarah called her parents from the base phone center to share news about her upcoming assignment. Miguel was proud but concerned about the dangerous path his daughter was choosing. Elena worried about how military training was changing the gentle girl who had grown up caring for injured animals and helping neighbors in need. Sarah reassured them that her core values remained unchanged, but she was discovering capabilities she never knew she possessed. As Sarah boarded the transport aircraft that would take her to Georgia and the next phase of her military career, she reflected on how much she had changed since leaving the ranch 6 months earlier. The shy farm girl who had enlisted with hopes of serving her country had become a confident soldier with proven abilities and clear objectives. The most challenging part of her journey was just beginning. The Army Sniper School at Fort Moore maintained a failure rate that would discourage most people before they even began. Of every 100 soldiers who started the course, fewer than 40 would graduate with sniper qualification. The training was designed not just to teach marksmanship, but to identify individuals who possessed the rare combination of technical skill, mental toughness, and psychological stability required for one of warfare's most demanding roles. Sarah arrived at Fort Moore on a humid Monday morning in September, carrying everything she owned in a single duffel bag and an equipment case containing her personal rifle tools. The training facility looked deceptively ordinary: several classroom buildings, a few barracks, and training ranges that stretched into pine forests. But Sarah had learned not to judge military challenges by their appearance. The most demanding tests often came in the most unremarkable settings. The first week of sniper school was devoted to academic instruction that covered subjects Sarah hadn't expected to encounter in military training. Advanced mathematics for ballistics calculations required understanding trigonometry, atmospheric physics, and complex variables that affected bullet trajectory over extreme distances. Map reading and navigation demanded precision that exceeded anything taught in basic military courses. Equipment maintenance involved learning to service and repair sophisticated optical and electronic systems worth more than most people's cars. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, the chief instructor, had been running sniper courses for 6 years and had developed an ability to assess new students quickly. Sarah's performance during the first week's written examinations and practical exercises marked her as a serious candidate, but Torres had seen many promising students fail when training intensity increased. Academic knowledge was only the foundation. Real evaluation began when students moved to field exercises under realistic conditions. The marksmanship portion of training introduced Sarah to weapon systems and shooting techniques far more sophisticated than anything she had previously encountered. The M24 sniper weapon system required understanding not just how to aim and fire accurately, but how to calculate range, wind speed, temperature, humidity, and elevation adjustments for shots at distances exceeding 1 mile. Each shot required mathematical calculations that had to be completed quickly and accurately while under physical and mental stress. Sarah's background in hunting and competitive shooting provided advantages, but military sniping demanded skills beyond civilian marksmanship. Shooting positions had to be maintained for hours without movement while conducting surveillance. Camouflage techniques required blending into environments so effectively that enemy forces could pass within feet without detection. Communication protocols demanded maintaining radio contact with command elements while remaining completely silent during critical missions. The stalking exercises pushed students to their physical and mental limits while testing skills that couldn't be taught in classroom settings. Sarah learned to move across open terrain so slowly and carefully that trained observers couldn't detect her approach even when they knew she was coming. These exercises required patience that most people couldn't maintain, moving only a few yards per hour, remaining motionless for extended periods, and accepting physical discomfort that would normally demand immediate attention. During one particularly challenging stalking exercise, Sarah spent 11 hours moving less than 800 yards across terrain that could be covered in 10 minutes at normal walking speed. The objective was to approach within 200 yards of an observation post without being detected by instructors equipped with high-powered optics and trained to spot students attempting the infiltration. Success required not just technical skill but mental discipline that allowed ignoring hunger, thirst, cramped muscles, and the natural urge to move at normal speeds. Sarah successfully completed the stalk by using techniques that combined her ranch experience with newly learned military methods. She identified vegetation patterns that provided concealment, used terrain features to mask her movement, and demonstrated patience that impressed even experienced instructors. When she reached the final position and correctly identified the targets in the observation post, she had proven her ability to operate effectively in one of sniper training's most demanding scenarios. The psychological evaluation component of sniper school tested students' emotional stability under conditions designed to reveal personality traits that might interfere with effective performance. Military psychologists conducted interviews that probed students' motivations, family backgrounds, personal relationships, and attitudes toward violence. The goal was identifying individuals who could handle the moral and emotional challenges of taking human lives when military necessity demanded such action. Sarah found these sessions more challenging than physical training or academic instruction. Discussing her motivations for pursuing sniper training required examining aspects of her personality she hadn't previously considered. She had to articulate how someone who grew up caring for animals and helping neighbors could adapt to roles that required ending human lives. The psychologists weren't looking for bloodthirsty individuals. They wanted soldiers who understood the gravity of their responsibilities and could function effectively despite the emotional weight of their actions. The turning point in Sarah's training came during a field exercise that combined all the skills taught in previous weeks. Students were assigned individual missions requiring them to infiltrate enemy territory, conduct multi-day surveillance of target areas, gather specific intelligence, and eliminate designated targets using precision fire. The exercise was conducted in realistic conditions with role players acting as enemy forces, creating stress levels that closely approximated actual combat situations. Sarah's assigned mission required her to observe an enemy command post for 72 hours, identify key personnel based on their activities and interactions, and eliminate the ranking officer when tactical conditions were favorable. The mission area covered several square miles of forested terrain where detection would result in immediate failure. Success required integrating every skill she had developed during months of training. The first challenge was reaching the observation area without detection by enemy patrols that moved unpredictably through the training zone. Sarah used lessons learned during stalking exercises to move carefully through dense forest, avoiding established trails and clearings where she might be spotted. Navigation required precise map reading since GPS devices were prohibited for this exercise. Progress was slow but steady as she worked toward the designated surveillance position. Establishing the observation post required finding a location that provided clear fields of view while offering concealment from enemy counter-surveillance efforts. Sarah selected a position on a hillside overlooking the command post that allowed her to observe activities while remaining hidden among fallen trees and dense undergrowth. Setting up required several hours of careful work to create firing positions and escape routes while ensuring her presence wouldn't be detected. The surveillance phase tested Sarah's patience and analytical skills as she observed enemy activities while gathering the intelligence required to complete her mission. She had to identify individual personalities based on their behavior, determine command relationships within the group, and wait for tactical opportunities that would allow engaging the primary target without compromising her position. This required maintaining focus for extended periods while dealing with weather, fatigue, and the stress of knowing that discovery would mean mission failure. On the second day of surveillance, Sarah identified her primary target, a role player designated as the enemy commander based on his interactions with other personnel and his central role in planning activities. However, engaging the target required waiting for tactical conditions that would allow a successful shot followed by escape before enemy forces could locate her position. This meant continuing surveillance while preparing for action that might not occur for many more hours. The opportunity finally presented itself on the third morning when the target moved to an isolated location for a briefing with subordinate leaders. Sarah had clear fields of fire with minimal risk of detection, and enemy patrol patterns provided a window for engaging the target and withdrawing before her position could be compromised. The shot itself was technically routine, a target at 400 yards under favorable weather conditions, but it represented the culmination of everything she had learned during months of training. Sarah's successful completion of the field exercise, combined with her consistent performance throughout the course, earned her graduation from sniper school with distinction. She was one of 31 students who completed the program out of 73 who had started training 3 months earlier. The graduation ceremony was simple but meaningful, a recognition that she had earned the right to wear the distinctive qualification badge that identified her as a military sniper. Master Sergeant Jennifer Kim, the school's senior instructor, delivered graduation remarks that emphasized the responsibilities that came with advanced marksmanship qualification. Snipers weren't just highly trained soldiers. They were force multipliers whose individual actions could influence tactical situations involving hundreds of other personnel. They would be called upon to make split-second decisions under extreme pressure, often with incomplete information and lives depending on their judgment. The week following graduation brought assignment orders that would determine where Sarah would apply her newly acquired skills. Most graduating snipers were assigned to infantry units deploying to combat zones where their capabilities would be needed immediately. Sarah's exceptional performance during training had earned her assignment to the 75th Ranger Regiment, an elite unit where she would work alongside the military's most experienced special operations personnel. The assignment represented both recognition of her abilities and acknowledgement that she would face challenges beyond those encountered by most military snipers. Ranger operations typically involved high-risk missions in hostile territory where small teams operated independently with minimal support. Success required not just individual competence, but the ability to function effectively as part of teams where every member's performance was critical to mission success and survival. Before departing Fort Moore for assignment to the Ranger Regiment, Sarah called her parents to share news about her graduation and upcoming assignment. Miguel understood enough about military organization to recognize that assignment to the Rangers represented exceptional achievement for any soldier, particularly someone so new to military service. Elena remained concerned about the increasing danger associated with her daughter's career path, but she was also proud of Sarah's accomplishments. As Sarah packed her equipment and prepared to report to her new unit, she reflected on how much her understanding of her own capabilities had expanded during the previous months. The farm girl who had enlisted with hopes of serving her country had become a highly trained specialist prepared to undertake missions that would test every aspect of her character and ability. The most challenging phase of her military career was about to begin. Fort Benning's Ranger training facilities buzzed with controlled intensity as Sarah reported for integration into the 75th Ranger Regiment. The atmosphere was different from anything she had previously experienced. These weren't ordinary soldiers going through routine training, but elite operators preparing for missions where failure wasn't just professionally embarrassing, but potentially fatal. Every conversation, every equipment check, every planning session carried weight that reflected the serious nature of their responsibilities. Captain James Morrison, commanding officer of Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, interviewed Sarah personally before approving her assignment to one of his sniper teams. Morrison had served 4 combat deployments and had worked with dozens of snipers during his career. He was interested less in Sarah's training records than in her ability to function under the extreme stress that characterized Ranger operations. Technical competence was assumed. What mattered was psychological resilience and team compatibility. The interview covered subjects that hadn't been addressed during formal military training. Morrison wanted to understand how Sarah would react when missions went wrong, how she handled moral ambiguity in combat situations, and whether she could maintain effectiveness when operating for extended periods without sleep, adequate food, or medical support. These weren't hypothetical questions. They reflected conditions that Ranger teams regularly encountered during deployments to hostile territories around the world. Sarah's assignment to Team 7 placed her with 3 experienced Rangers who had worked together for over 2 years and completed multiple combat deployments. Staff Sergeant David Chun served as team leader and had earned decoration for actions during previous tours in Afghanistan. Sergeant First Class Marcus Williams operated as the team's communications specialist and secondary marksman. Specialist Robert Garcia functioned as the team's medic and demolitions expert. Integration into an established team presented challenges beyond those Sarah had faced during individual training programs. These soldiers had developed working relationships based on shared experiences under combat conditions, and they needed confidence that Sarah could perform effectively when their lives depended on her abilities. Acceptance had to be earned through demonstrated competence rather than training credentials or official assignments. The team's first joint training exercise tested Sarah's ability to operate effectively within the group dynamic that characterized successful Ranger teams. The mission scenario required infiltrating enemy territory to conduct surveillance on a high-value target, gathering specific intelligence over a 72-hour period, and eliminating the target when tactical conditions were favorable. Success demanded seamless coordination between team members who had to function as a unified element despite having distinct specialties. Sarah's role as the team's designated marksman required her to provide long-range precision fire support while maintaining overall situational awareness that contributed to team security. This meant balancing focus on potential sniper targets with attention to broader tactical developments that might threaten the team's position or compromise their mission. The dual responsibility demanded mental flexibility that exceeded requirements for individual marksmanship training. The exercise revealed both Sarah's capabilities and areas where she needed additional development. Her shooting skills exceeded team requirements, and her individual tactical abilities were exceptional, but she needed experience working within the communication patterns and decision-making processes that enabled effective small unit operations. These skills couldn't be taught in classroom settings. They developed through repeated training with the same personnel under realistic conditions. Staff Sergeant Chun provided honest feedback that helped Sarah understand expectations for her performance within the team structure. Ranger operations typically involved split-second decisions made under extreme pressure with incomplete information and lives at stake. Team members needed confidence in each other that went beyond professional competence to include personal trust that couldn't be developed quickly or casually. The training schedule for Ranger teams exceeded anything Sarah had experienced during previous military instruction. Physical fitness requirements included long-range marches with full equipment, climbing and rappelling exercises, swimming and water survival training, and combat simulation exercises that continued for days without breaks. Academic instruction covered advanced tactics, equipment operation, foreign languages, cultural awareness, and mission planning procedures that prepared teams for deployment to any global location. One particularly demanding exercise tested the team's ability to operate in desert environments similar to those they might encounter during Middle East deployments. The training area at Fort Irwin, California, presented challenges that combined extreme temperatures, difficult terrain, limited water availability, and enemy forces played by experienced military personnel who understood Ranger tactics and capabilities. The mission required Sarah's team to infiltrate a defended area, conduct surveillance on enemy activities for 5 days, and eliminate specific targets when opportunities arose. Operating conditions included daytime temperatures exceeding 110 degrees, nighttime temperatures dropping below freezing, and tactical situations that required constant movement to avoid enemy counter-reconnaissance efforts. Sarah discovered that effective sniping in desert environments demanded skills beyond those taught in standard marksmanship training. Heat mirages made target identification difficult at extended ranges. Wind patterns changed constantly throughout the day, and equipment maintenance required constant attention due to sand and dust infiltration. Successfully engaging targets required adapting shooting techniques to environmental conditions that couldn't be replicated during range training. The exercise's most challenging aspect was maintaining team effectiveness during extended operations with minimal sleep, limited food, and constant stress from enemy contact. Sarah learned that individual competence was only part of effective team performance. Success required maintaining unit cohesion when everyone was exhausted, equipment was failing, and mission requirements kept changing based on tactical developments. During the fourth day of the exercise, Sarah's team received orders to eliminate a high-value target who had been identified through intelligence sources as planning attacks against coalition forces. The target was located in a compound that required approaching within 600 yards to achieve clear fields of fire. But enemy security measures made close approach extremely dangerous. Sarah worked with Staff Sergeant Chun to develop a plan that would allow engaging the target while providing escape routes if their position was compromised. The plan required her to establish a shooting position before dawn, wait throughout the day for the target to appear, and be prepared to engage immediately when the opportunity presented itself. Success demanded patience, technical skill, and nerves that could handle pressure when lives depended on making a perfect shot. The target finally appeared late in the afternoon when he emerged from the compound to meet with subordinate personnel. Sarah had maintained her position for over 10 hours in temperatures that reached 115 degrees while wearing full combat equipment and remaining completely motionless to avoid detection. The shot itself was technically routine, a target at 580 yards under clear atmospheric conditions, but it represented the first time Sarah had aimed at a human being with the intention of taking a life. The moment between target acquisition and trigger squeeze lasted only seconds, but it crystallized everything Sarah had learned about the responsibilities that came with her role as a military sniper. This wasn't training or competition shooting. It was a decision to end a human life based on military intelligence and command authority. The weight of that responsibility would stay with her throughout her career, regardless of how many similar situations she might face in the future. Sarah's successful completion of the shot achieved the mission objective and demonstrated her ability to perform under combat realistic conditions, but it also marked a psychological transition that changed her relationship with her own capabilities. She had proven to herself and her teammates that she could function effectively when military necessity required taking human life, but the experience also reinforced her understanding of the moral gravity inherent in such decisions. The team's extraction from the training area required movement through enemy territory during hours of darkness while avoiding patrols that were actively searching for their location. Sarah learned that successful sniper operations required not just accurate shooting, but comprehensive tactical skills that enabled teams to reach designated positions, complete their missions, and escape without detection. Individual marksmanship was only one component of effective sniper team operations. Following completion of the desert training exercise, Sarah's integration into Team 7 was essentially complete.